Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest introduced to you now. Brian Keane is a highly influential figure in the health and fitness industry with a combined social media following of over 500,000. As the host of one of Ireland and the United Kingdom's top health podcast, he regularly holds the number one spot on the iTunes health charts. A multiple best-selling author, Brian's most recent book is called Rewriting Your Story: 7 Habits to Help You Reclaim Your Power, Let Go of Fear, and Change the Narratives That Hold You Back. Over the past decade, he has become one of the most recognizable faces in the Irish health and fitness community. Brian has been a featured speaker at prominent wellness events, including Wellfest Ireland and Mefit Dubai, and was a keynote speaker at Google headquarters for the 2018 wellness event. He's also delivered corporate wellness talks for several major companies. In addition to his thriving business, Brian is no stranger to endurance challenges. He has completed some of the world's most grueling feats, including 6 consecutive marathons through the Sahara Desert, wow, a 230-kilometer trek through the Arctic, and multiple ultramarathons, highlighted by a 100-mile race through the desert in Nevada. You can find Brian on his website at briankeenfitness.com. Brian Keane, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
The pleasure's all mine, Casey. Thank you so much for having me on.
It's such an honor to host you. You're one of the people that I'm so glad I got to meet. I feel like we've been friends forever. Listening to your podcast and your content is just so wonderful, and all the books you've written, it's just really wonderful work that you've been doing. So it's just such an honor to host you on the show.
Oh, I'm really excited to chat and go deeper and hopefully serve your audience in a really meaningful way today, Casey. So thank you so much again.
First question is a very selfish one. Thanks to Netflix, I've become interested in the Six Nations rugby tournament. Do you have any rugby updates for us?
Oh, I don't. All I know, based on, because it didn't quite go to plan this year, I thought we were going to get a Grand Slam and get the. I want to have a very good year in terms of the rugby, but it kind of fell apart towards the back end. But next year, always next year, and we'll be preparing for the upcoming World Cups. That's the most important thing.
Got it. I did see, I think you guys just had a victory over Italy. And man, like I said, there was a Netflix special that went all into the Six Nations tournament. I had no idea about it. And just to see the passion in all the different countries in Europe, like I cannot believe I didn't know about it, but I'm definitely a fan now.
Oh, it's incredible. Like such a small country. We've got less than 5 million people here. And because of what we're doing with rugby, it's kind of putting Irish sport on the map. So it's incredible. Like New Zealand were obviously a big inspiration for us because they're a small nation as well. And they're the OGs of rugby in terms of performance. But seeing a small nation do well on the world stage when it comes to a sport, because Ireland, we're not used to it in terms of soccer. Our Olympic teams don't do as well as, say, the United States or even the UK. So it's great to see. And again, makes us very proud to be Irish.
That's amazing. I love that, dude. We have one thing in common where we've been in the fitness industry for quite a while now. It's a tough industry to stay in for a long time. Like the gym I used to work at was 100% commission. A lot of trainers couldn't cut it. They ended up going to like medical sales or other different things. And you have been in this industry for a long time. And I heard you talking in a recent podcast about actually going broke multiple times in your life, including one where literally you went very broke, but you did it because you chose what you wanted to do, something that one of our former guests and one of my clients talks about as soul purpose. He was chasing a soul purpose, SOUL purpose. Tell us what it was like to be in that position, to be where you wanted to be, obviously not what you were first doing, but then to transition to the fitness industry and to have so much passion that you were literally willing to go all the way to being like flat out broke doing it.
It's a really interesting journey because if I'm not mistaken, I think it was 2007 you qualified. So you were a few years ahead of me. I was 2012. And for me, I trained as an elementary school teacher. So that was my job. It's what I thought I was going to do until I was age 65. And then I was going to retire and do the normal life of, 2.3 kids, retire 65, live another few years and then die. And that's it. When I qualified first as a teacher, and got my first teaching job, which was in a school in West London in the UK. I was about 30 minutes into my first day in a third grade classroom with 37-year-old children. And I thought, this isn't what I want to do. I've spent the last 4 years getting a degree in business studies and then a graduate degree in teaching, all to become and follow this route. And the analogy that I've used in books, my most recent one as well, Rewriting Your Story, is that it felt like I spent years climbing a ladder only to realize it was up against the wrong wall. And that's what happened to me. And there was a large chunk of the sunk cost fallacy kicking in. I spent all this time, energy, money, and this was what the career I thought I was supposed to do. It's what my family and friends told me that I should do. It's what I just kind of accepted as the norm. And I came home that Christmas after 4 months in a teaching job and had a nice little pity party for myself, Casey. I was like miserable. I hated my job. I was the first in every morning. I was the last to leave every evening. I didn't understand the United Kingdom educational system. I took on way too many projects within the school to try and make myself a fit in there and make myself valuable to the team because I wanted to rise and climb that ladder. And I was completely burnt out that Christmas. And I remember coming home, and I spoke about this in Habit 6 of the new book about giving yourself a reason to jump out of bed every morning. And I was miserable. I wasn't quite suicidal ideation, but I was really, really, really unhappy. And I was out one night with my friends, and I had a few drinks. And again, I say this publicly now, and I shouldn't, because hopefully they can't arrest you in in hindsight, going back, 14 years ago or 12 years ago. I was having a few drinks with my friends, and I drove home. And I remember as I was coming back to my mom and dad's house, there's like this bridge that you normally just slow down to about 40 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, and you kind of take the bridge normal speed. And I found myself speeding up as I came to this bridge. I was doing 60 miles an hour. I went to 70 miles an hour. I went to 80 miles an hour. And it wasn't that I was wanted to crash the car and just end my life, but I was really miserable and unhappy with what I was doing. And I thought I was stuck, because what's weird now as a 37-year-old man, looking back when I was 23, 24, I thought I'm a disappointment to everybody. I've made such terrible decisions. I hate my job. I'm stuck in this. I don't like London. I don't want to be here anymore. This is not what I'm supposed to be doing. And all those emotions kind of flooded to my head as I was driving up towards this bridge. And then something just snapped, and I was like, oh, Jesus. And I slammed on the brakes. The car did a 180 in the middle of the road. It was 3 a.m., thankfully, at Christmas. So nobody was there or nobody was on the road. And I kind of composed myself, shook it off, and then went home and went to sleep. And then woke up the next day and remembered the night before and was thinking, oh, Jesus. I was like, that was pretty scary. And then I went out to the kitchen where my mother was cooking, preparing for Christmas dinner, and I just bawled out crying. I just got a complete breakdown. And the old adage that you need to break down to break through was very relevant in my case. And my mum, who's always been my biggest fan from day one to now, said something that I've never forgot and actually made it as a section into that book. And she asked the question, what would you do for free? And I sat there and I kind of shook myself off, going, okay, firstly, I'm not stuck. I'm not getting this, I'm a disappointment back from somebody whose opinion I massively value. But it also got me thinking, and I thought I would work in a gym for free. I was like, if I was cleaning the floor in a gym, fitness was always my passion. It was my hobby, my passion, and a combination of both all through my life. I played sport all through my life, and the gym was a massive part of that. And I wanted to be in that environment. And I said, if I was just sweeping the floor and had enough money to put a roof over my head and food in my mouth, this was before I had my daughter. So I was single, I had no ties. I knew myself I'd be happy in that scenario. So that played out. And I went, okay, well, how do you work in a gym? And I started to research things like fitness instructor courses, personal training courses, and then everything opened up from there. I wrote my notice and handed it in virtually over email to my head teacher, my principal at the time, and signed up to a level 2 fitness instructor course that January. And when I went back to London, that first day in the classroom for a fitness instructor course was the complete opposite of how I felt my first day as an elementary school teacher. I thought, this is where I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be doing this. I don't know what this looks like yet, but this is where I'm supposed to be. And fast forward multiple years on, I got my personal training certificate. Then I went and got my sports nutrition, my strength and conditioning. I went and qualified in all those areas and was able to set up a business that is something I never want to retire from. I have a business podcast as well on top of my health podcast, the Brian Keane podcast. The online business podcast is the business podcast. And I always speak on there that try and create a business you don't want to retire from. And for me, it led off going broke twice, because I'm shortening this story greatly, because I did all the mistakes you could make as a personal trainer, as a coach. I spent all my money on branded kit with a logo. I had business cards and I had no clients. So the worst occasion of that was in London when I was making the attempt number two as a personal trainer and then working as a teacher during the day. I spent all my money on gym rental. Slightly different setup to you. I had to pay a gym in the UK, which was very expensive. It was actually the same as my rent in my apartment at the time. So I had way too much month at the end of the money regularly, and I burnt through that quite quickly. And I had to go down through, and I'll never forget this moment because people always ask, "Is that true?" I had to go down toward the back of my couch because I couldn't take out a £10 note in my bank account, and I had to pay my rent that month because you in the UK, if you have less than £10, you can't actually take money physically out of a machine. So I had to go down the back of my couch to get money for the bus so that I could get to the bank so I could set up an overdraft so I could pay my month, but pay my rent that month. And looking back, that was me done. I was like, I'm not cut out to be a personal trainer. I'm not cut out to be in the fitness industry. I'm not good at this. And by the universe or God or a higher power or whatever it was, one of the teachers, when I went back as a substitute, tail between my legs because I had failed twice at a fitness business. She came in and said, "I'm preparing for a wedding in 6 months. I heard you're a personal trainer." And I said, "Oh no, that's not something I do anymore. That was something I was trying for a while. It didn't work." And she goes, "Look, please." And I said, "Okay, I'll take you on as a client. I don't have a gym. I'll take you in the park, but I can't charge you for it." I was like, "I'm no good at this personal training thing, but I will take you down. And I'll do some workouts with you." And then after the third session, she was starting to lose a bit of weight. I was helping her with the nutrition, and she was ended up saying, "Look, I can't take your time for this. Look, I'm dropping weight. I'm losing body fat. I feel great. Please take money for these sessions." And it was in that moment I thought, oh, I'm not a bad personal trainer. I just don't understand business. And they're two very different things. They're two completely different hats you have to wear as an entrepreneur. And fast forward 12 years on, that was the seed of failure, planting the tree for future success. I've gone on and I've written multiple best-selling books. I've got a very big podcast, one of the top health podcasts in the world, a decent social media profile. I help and have helped thousands of people over the years between programs and coaching and courses. And it all kind of seeded from that failure of going broke, having my ladder against the wrong wall, and getting better at listening to that voice, like you mentioned there about your client, that soul, following the soul call. And that's what I've been doing for the last decade or so. And it's got me to the point now where I get to have awesome conversations with you, Casey. I get to do things that I would do for free still to this day. And I'm very, very grateful for the situation. But the reason I share it is sometimes when we're in the thick of it, whether it's weight loss, whether it's, a lot of people I know on carnivore, low carbohydrate diets, trying to balance their blood sugars, trying to get their body composition to where they want to be, trying to get their energy to where it want to be. Sometimes it's very hard to see the end result when you're in the early stages of it. But every master was once a disaster. Everyone who's mastered their nutrition once didn't have a mastery of their nutrition. They got there for a reason by trial and error, working with coaches, listening to podcasts like this, educating themselves. And the same goes into career, same goes in relationships. I know it's Bethany, if I'm not mistaken, like you don't build really successful relationships, really successful businesses, really successful body composition without failure being feedback and not letting the failure be final. And that mindset shift is so important in all different facets of life.
That is a super inspiring story. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I couldn't agree more. Finding something that, like you write about, and I believe it's habit 6, like jump out of bed. What are you willing to jump out of bed for? What are you willing to do for free? I told people the same thing. If you gave me $10 million today, I'd still show up for all my clients at 6 a.m. on Monday and do the same thing. I don't want to retire from this like you. So I really love that. A lot of what you're talking about is definitely relevant to your latest book, which I definitely want to talk about. Before we do, I want to know, somebody who's been in the industry for as long as you've had and has such a passion for this work, what are some things that you were taught about personal training and fitness in particular that you've since moved your attention away from, like maybe something you were taught in a certification or qualification that you no longer believe in, or certain myths that you were taught that you no longer believe in?
That's a great question. There's two that come to mind very clearly. One is what works for you doesn't necessarily work for everybody else. And I made this mistake as a trainer. When I started personal training first, I was a big carb cycling guy and I was a big circuit and giant set guy for training. So by proxy, most of my clients did carbohydrate cycling and they did giant sets and circuits, when in reality, there was people who needed low carb. There was people who needed a carnivore diet. There was other people who needed to be plant-based. There was other people who needed to be keto. And the same with training. There was people who needed more cardio. There was people who needed to strength train more and lift heavier. There was people who needed to focus on time under tension and straight sets. So that was the first thing. That took me a while to kind of get through that. Everybody, it's square pegs into square holes. And the more tools you have as a coach, the more you can help and serve people. Similar to you, I've got clients now. Some of them are carnivore, some are low carb, some are plant-based, some are keto. It depends on what works for the individual. That's the first thing. The second thing was when I was getting my qualifications and accreditations, there was a big emphasis on calories in, calories out. And that was a big learning foundational point of my nutritional qualifications. And there's definitely an element of truth to this, as there is in all things with nutrition. To say that calories don't exist and calorie deny isn't nutritionally, scientifically strong. But to say that it's the only thing that's important also isn't true, because you'll have a lot of people who will control for calories with high sugar foods or highly processed foods, or plant-based people, I find from my experience, tend to be quite bad with this. People who are like, I'm vegan, and they're eating loads of processed foods, and they're horribly, horribly devoid of nutrients. And they're like, well, I'm vegan, it's healthy. And then you unpack it and go, well, okay, well, healthy is a very subjective thing. This isn't healthy. Your blood sugar markers are all over the place. Your health markers are all over the place. I'm like, you're eating way too much processed food here. And that opened up the door to educating myself more on the different nutritional protocols, things like the carnivore diet, things like the ketogenic diet. I'm a big keto guy when it comes to training for those ultras, the ones you mentioned at the start. I always go into keto when I'm doing something very, very extreme. So the 100-miler, running through the Sahara, running through the Arctic, I was fueled by the ketogenic diet for that, because it serves, they're multiple day races. So it makes sense to be metabolically flexible enough that you can run without food. So you don't have to be taking on gels every 40 minutes. That's just a non-runner. If you're trying to do 6 back-to-back marathons in the Sahara, you have to learn an alternative fuel source, because you're carrying all your food on your back. So you become a little bit of a guinea pig for what works and what doesn't work. And when I was qualifying first, there was so much nearly an overemphasis on how important calories were, without the context of, look, yes, a gram of carbohydrate is 4 kilocalories, a gram of protein is 4 kilocalories, a gram of fat is 9 kilocalories. That's really important, and it's good nutritional math to know as a nutritionist. But it's not everything, because you're talking about metabolic flexibility. You're talking about individual context for a person's goal. You're talking about the markers they're coming in with. Like, if you're following a low carb diet, if you're following a ketogenic diet, if you're following a carnivore diet, you've got there for some reason, and you have a reason for following this nutritional protocol, same as every nutritional protocol out there. And what I found they didn't teach, that was a bit of a gap, was how square pegs fit into square holes, and the reason somebody comes to want to try a diet, because that's psychology. They're bringing the adherence in because this is what they want to follow. That was completely missing from my studies, and I learned that through experience, through working with people, seeing that, okay, this is what the math says, this is what the science says, this is what my degree says, but actually this doesn't work for this person over here. I have to apply a different protocol. So that was probably the biggest one.
I love that. That's a great answer. That's also the reason I found low carbohydrate diets to begin with. I was doing like you, like eating all the carbohydrates, and you're trying to do these endurance events, and it's not practical, makes your stomach hurt. And so you learn that, oh, if I can burn fat, well, I have the fat on me, I'm carrying the fuel with me, I can just burn that as fuel. And right, you can compete as long as you like without, getting tired. Tell us about the preparation for some of those events. I'm particularly curious about the string of marathons through the Sahara. What was that like?
The Sahara was a very interesting one, because that was my first race, actually my first ever marathon that I signed up for. Don't mind race. So I think I need to give a little bit of a backstory to how I got into that, because it makes more sense for people who physically know what I look like versus hearing my voice on a podcast. So I played sport. Our national sport in Ireland is Gaelic football. It's like a combination between basketball, rugby, soccer. So I grew up playing that sport. But when I was 26, I went into bodybuilding and fitness modeling. So that was my foundation. I was very much built for that world. I'm 5'8". I'm built like a little muscular hobbit. Like I'm built to put on muscle and put on size. I'm very lucky in that sense in terms of like, you know, if they make a Lord of the Rings movie that's all going to be muscular hobbits, they'll probably cast me as the star. So I'm still holding out, fingers crossed someday that'll come, an Amazon Prime series or Netflix series. But I went into that world for a few years. So I'm quite thick. I'm quite muscular, and I gravitate towards that style of training, and I find it quite easy. Running is something I find very difficult, and I still to this day, and I do more kind of high rock style stuff at the minute. In terms of the races that I do, it's shorter. It works better for my lifestyle right now in terms of not having to train for multiple hours a day with my daughter and business, etc. But at the time, I signed up to the 6 back-to-back marathons in the Sahara as my first ever race that I was going to do. And it happened in August of 2017. But if we rewind to April 2017, I was at an event in Amsterdam, a business mastery event where I was looking to build and scale up my business. And I ran into another entrepreneur there, someone who's become a good friend of mine since. His name is Tom Otten. He just got an exit from his massive digital marketing agency in the UAE in Dubai. And I met him at this event, and he was looking at me and he was like, "Oh, you're into fitness." I was there, t-shirt. You can kind of see fitness people, can recognize fitness people. And I was like, "Yeah, I do. I used to do bodybuilding shows. I played sport, etc." And I said, "What do you do?" He was lean, but he was considerably smaller than me. And he goes, "Well, I do ultra marathons." And I looked at him and I was so far from this world. And I was like, "Sorry now, I should know this as a fitness professional." I was like, "But what's an ultra marathon?" And he goes, "Well, it's anything over 26.2 miles, anything over a marathon distance." And I remember thinking, 26.2 miles. I was like, I don't even want to drive 26.2 miles. Don't mind run 26.2 miles. And he started talking about this race he did in the Sahara. It's called Marathon des Sables, Marathon of the Sands in the north of Morocco, and it's self-sufficient. He was explaining the story that you have to carry all your food on your back. You need to have a venom pump within arm's reach at all time in case you get bitten by a snake. And it's all self-sufficient except for you get water at your checkpoints. And you get a certain amount of water. And if you spill that water, it's gone. You literally just have to go without it until the next day. So you have to mind and nurture that like it's your firstborn child when you're giving your water bottles. And I remember listening to him going, that sounds insane. And I missed the entire next speaker at the event because I was on my phone researching Marathon des Sables. And I was like, that is so cool. That is so badass. I'd love to do that. And then I did like most people do when something kind of piques your curiosity or your interest. I came home from Amsterdam, took Tom's number, we stayed in touch, and my language, similar to the new title of the book, Rewriting Your Story, my story was, that's something other people do. I was like, "Brian, you've never ran more than 5K." And I used to run that in the Gaelic football off season, but that was the furthest I'd ever gone. And I was like, there's no way I could run 6 back-to-back marathons in the Sahara. So I just left it and I forgot about it. Then in August, several months later, I don't know if you remember, Casey, but back in 2017, Instagram was all about the quote cards. So if you could put up quote cards and people would
Oh
share
yeah.
it and post, they were really, really popular. So I created a postcard, uh, basically a quote card, apologies, that said, "Behind every fear is a person you want to be." And I remember sitting outside the gym, about to post this quote, and I looked myself in the mirror in my car and went, "You hypocrite." I was like, "You cannot post this." I was like, "You heard about this race in April and you literally won't do it because you're afraid to do it. You have all the stories in the world that you can't run, you're not a runner, etc." And I felt really misaligned with the content that I was about to post and how I was actually showing up in the real world. So I did my workout. I came home and I said, "Okay, just going to sign up for this race." So I paid the full race, the whole thing in one go, and then I posted that card that evening, or quote card that evening. And I'm cutting a long story short here, but I remember my first training run was the next day. I went into the gym and I did my normal push workout. So I did like chest, shoulders, triceps, standard push pull leg split. And I said, "Okay, I better do a run at the end of this workout." So I said, "I'll do 3K." I was like, nothing too hectic, just ease me into it. And I had never ran a treadmill at this point, ever. Anytime I ran, it was outside. So I put the treadmill at 20 kilometers an hour, which I'm not sure of the miles equivalent, but 20 kilometers an hour is enough to be a YouTube sensation to fly off the treadmill. And
Quick, yeah.
it started going really quick. And I didn't know if that was fast or slow. I had no reference point for speed on a treadmill at this point. This was so far outside my wheelhouse. And I said at 1.5 incline, 3 kilometers, I said I'd do, and I put it at 20 kilometers and I did it. And I nearly got sick when I got off the treadmill. And I pulled myself back to the dressing room and I sat there and I went, oh, shit. I was like, 6 marathons in the Sahara is the equivalent of 250 kilometers. And I'm after feeling like I'm going to get sick after three. I was like, how am I going to do this? And thankfully, I had enough tools in my arsenal at that point in terms of mindset tools. It was before any of the books came out, or it was actually just after the first book, The Fitness Mindset, came out. And I said, okay, pyramid of prioritization, something I do with clients all the time. I'm like, okay, what's the thing I have to focus on? And I thought to myself, well, there's no point worrying about running 6 marathons in the Sahara if I can't even run one. So that became the target. I set that as the goal. I signed up to the Dubai Marathon in January 2018. And I said, I'm going to go over and I'm going to do that with a backpack, full weighted kit, and I'll run that marathon. And that was the first marathon I ever did. And then 4 months later, I got to the Sahara. And to say I ran 6 back-to-back marathons would be using the term very loosely. I ran parts of it and shuffled and moved the rest of it. Like, because after a certain point, your hips, your ankles, your knees, like you're moving, but you're kind of shuffling. It's kind of a run, but it's kind of a run shuffle. There's blisters on your feet. It's 40 degree, or it's got up as high as I think 47 degrees was as high as it got. It gets very, very hot.
That's hot.
And it was, yeah, degrees Celsius. And so your feet are mangled from the blisters on your toes. And I ended up getting through it. I completed it. I learned a lot from it because the year after I did 230 kilometers through the Arctic, and that's when I started to look into more keto based stuff. I had been doing keto in the lead up to Sahara as well. I was trained as a nutritional therapist, so I was able to do that. I was able to really maximize that in the Arctic because I had never done multiple day things like that. I ran out of food on the last day. Like I literally ran out of food. I got so hungry. I did the reverse of the other runners in the race because they were like skinny ultra runners. Most of them had food, and thankfully they're amazing people. Ultra runners are the salt of the earth, a lot of them, and they were giving me food because I ran out. I had eaten all my food. I was so hungry. I was 85 kilos, 5'8", a muscular hobbit trying to run through the Sahara. I was famished and I ate all my food. So everything that was on my backpack was gone by the sixth day. So thankfully they gave me food. I was able to get to the finish line, and then I was able to kind of optimize that going to the Arctic the year later in terms of the ketogenic and going way more fat based. I was doing that kind of metabolic flexibility with carb loading, which is oats, not a lot, but just enough to get that 50, 60 grams of carb to kind of keep me ticking over, nothing too crazy. Most of it was dietary fat. Whereas when I went to the Arctic, it was nearly all dietary fat that I went with. So I was in that combination of your ketosis through your nutritional ketosis mixed in with fasting ketosis, because you're in minus 38 degrees and your body's just burning calories like you're a 15-year-old boy playing sport and running all day. So it was a very interesting experience, but the Sahara was my introductory point into it.
Wow, that is an amazing story. I often say that like endurance sport is such a cool metaphor for life. Like you learn a lot, and you even mentioned yourself, you learned a lot from that. You learn practical stuff, but there must have been something else you learned that was more like about your mental space, your emotional space, maybe something spiritual. Like those journeys, what have they taught you beyond pack a little bit more food so you don't run out on day six, and the ins and outs of like a ketogenic diet. What other things that were deeper have you learned from doing some of these challenges?
Oh, I love that question. I've two again, because one is a lot more spiritual and one is a little bit more practical. The practical one is to back yourself more. And that's one of the chapters. It's actually changed. The chapter and the habit in the new book is take your power back, but it's wrapped in a backing yourself more is the under foundational pyramid of that habit. Because when you build confidence, I always picture confidence, and I spoke about this in Rewire Your Mindset, another book that I wrote, that it's like I always visualize a table, and confidence is like having legs on a table. It's why it's so important when you start a new journey to be very mindful of who you're surrounding yourself with, because when you're starting something new, you don't have a lot of competence, and if you don't have competence, it's hard to have confidence. And the more times you repeatedly keep promises to yourself, you do that run, you eat the meal, you show up, you add a small leg to your table, or you add a small leg to that table, and then everyone once in a while, you hit like a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. You do something big. You'll, get a compliment from somebody you never thought you'd get the compliment from. You'll hit a milestone in your weight, or, you'll have energy, or you'll be able to run around with your kids and not get fatigued or tired. You'll have some milestone that will hit, that will put a big leg on your confidence table. And that was something that I got from the Sahara, because it felt like one person left and another person came back, partly because I didn't know if I was going to finish it until I got to the end. And that was uniquely my experience, because I have a history of backing out of things when they get really difficult. I always tell people, and labels are for food, but people label you with, mentally resilient or mentally tough. And that was something I really had to build, because that's not my default state at all. So learning to back myself more was a really important one. The one that actually transformed my life for the best was in the Arctic. And the Arctic is a little bit of a different story, because I tore my Achilles 86 kilometers from the end. So I pulled one leg behind me for 86K. There's a viral photo that got picked up all over the news media in Ireland at the time, because I was moving so slowly when my Achilles tore. Your eyes are made of so much water that it was minus 20 degrees. My eyelids started to freeze over and I couldn't blink because of all the water in your eyes. So that photo of just bloodshot eyes, I looked like a zombie or something out of like a
Oh my
horror
goodness.
movie, and it went viral all around. But I strapped it up like literally to the point that I couldn't feel my ankle below my foot. They gave me painkillers, because it was like this local, it's actually a really cool experience, Casey. So like how they do the Arctic Ultra is it's 230 kilometers over 5 days, but it's linked in with the indigenous reindeer Sami tribe. So there's this tribe who farm reindeers, and they set up these teepees and they put holes in the water so they'll heat your water, and you've got these special thermal flasks where they'll give you the water so that you're able to go from checkpoint to checkpoint every 10 to 12 kilometers. It's an incredible experience. But when I was in that one of the teepees, there was a medic there, and she was looking at me going, look, this could rupture. And I thought, look, fuck it, if it ruptures, it ruptures. I was like, I'm going to be safe. I've got one of those GPS systems on me that they can come and get me medically. So I didn't feel like I was a threat of my life. But I said, no, if I can move. I was like, if you strap this tight enough and you give me a painkiller, I can move. I'm pulling the leg behind me, but I can move. And what that taught me was, this is going to sound like such a either a cliche or maybe something really basic, but it made me think about it, that it doesn't matter how slow we're going as long as the direction is right. That's what's important. And the Arctic, it didn't matter that I was in so much pain, and that pain is temporary. And it's so weird. I had such a, I'm going off on a side tangent now, but I feel I need to bring this in. I was speaking at an event, one of the ones I was running before COVID, and I had a woman come up to me. I did a podcast on the Arctic recap. It's 213 Arctic, 230 K's to the Arctic, or something like that is the title. And there was a girl who came up to me. She was about 40, 41 years old. And she was like, your podcast on the Arctic changed my life. And I was like, oh, cool. I was like, did you like the story? I was like, it was a bit mad, the Achilles tearing. And she was like, no, no. She was like, I was going through chemo at the time. She goes, I had cancer. And you had a line in there that pain is temporary, that it doesn't matter how hard and how difficult it feels now. Keep pushing through and keep moving forward and keep moving in the right direction, regardless of how slow you're going. And Casey, I was in tears. Like there was a big fucking queue of like 30 people behind her to meet me after this event. And I was like holding back these tears going, oh my, I was like, do you realize how much that's impacting me? Because it was her words that I said, finding me back and mirroring back to me. And it made me think that how important it can be to share what's authentically true. And it just made me really double down. That was an incredible experience at that event, that it doesn't matter how slow we're going, relationships, body composition, health, business, as long as you're moving in the right direction, it doesn't matter how slow you go. And that is something I got from the Arctic that even to this day, I still check in with, because you know yourself, as type A's, as entrepreneurs, running your business, doing a podcast, there's always more, 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 more. And that's great. Go after big goals, and, obviously be present in the moment, and, don't forget the flowers at your feet when you're reaching for the moon. But know that as long as you're going in the right direction, that's the most important thing, because it's not about the fast spurts. It's not about sprinting all the time. You can be taking slow steps, but as long as you're directionally correct, that's the most important thing.
Man, I absolutely love that. What an amazing lesson. And yeah, such a cool way to impact somebody out there who really took that to heart. And I think all of us can remember that. And you're right, like the daily grind and the drive. And there is always more to do. One of the words that I chose for myself for this year is enough, because I often don't think of myself as enough. I don't think the business is enough. You're always trying to push and grind more. And you and I can go talk for hours probably about strength training protocols, heart rate training zones, specific diets, all kinds of stuff that we can get really technical in. We both love hosting people to talk about that stuff. But I think you and I know, and probably the listener feels also, like the thing that they need help with the most is not a specific protocol or a specific diet. It's mindset kind of a thing. And so, when things get stressful, when things get tough, when it's easy to give in to the food, people know what they should be eating and should be eating if they have any awareness and are working with us, but it's often something that goes beyond that. And that's why I love your latest book, Rewriting Your Story. What message were you trying to convey to the reader in writing that book?
It's another really good one, because when I was writing that book, it started as a book on mental resilience and mental toughness, funnily enough. And so the original title was based on a very popular podcast I did in 2018. It was my most downloaded podcast of that year, and it was called Eight Critical Habits for Building Mental Toughness. So, something that I've historically done is I've always used my audience and feedback to crowdsource what I write about, because ultimately it's about serving people in a meaningful way. And my first book, The Fitness Mindset, which I released in 2017, that sold nearly 500,000 copies to date and did way better than I ever imagined when I wrote it. I wrote that based on the clients I was working with at the time, because the first half of the book is all about fitness. It's what you mentioned there: training, nutrition, sleep, hydration, etc. But the second half was all about mindset, your habits, your managing your stress, your anxiety, making sure you're setting the right goals and being directionally correct. They were things that my clients were struggling with. A lot of them knew how they should eat. A lot of them knew that they should move more and that they should strength train, but that wasn't the thing that held them back. And my whole philosophy with writing that first book was, if it only helps my clients, it'll be a success. That was my whole thinking. I was writing to one or two of my clients in mind. They always say write to a single person. And I was like, if it helps them, the book will have done its job. Now, it's ended up surpassing that by, you know, 250x fold nearly, in terms of the way that it's done. But rewriting your story took a similar process, because when I released my second book, Rewire Your Mindset, there's a theme with all my books, as you can gather here. That book did great. And a lot of people message still to this day about it. It's actually one of my favorite books that I've written outside of this last one. And one of the core messages from that was people struggling with the narrative, struggling with the, okay, I get the practical advice, split your life into four quadrants: your health, wealth, love, and fulfillment. I get the don't let your biggest enemy be between your two ears. I get the manage the fear and do it anyways. I get all these concepts, but I still don't know how to apply it. And what I try to do with rewriting your story, and this is what I love, because I'm reading all the Amazon reviews right now, because the book's been out for just over a month, and there's not that many reviews, but there's 51 or 52 reviews up on Amazon. So I'm reading all of them as they come through. And the feedback has been that people are like, it's the underpinning of the narrative, it's the story that was stopping me. And that's what I was trying to get across in the message, was it's what you do. A famous line that I use, that I'm sure I stole from somebody and I can't remember who, because I'd give it back. I'd give them the correct attribution if I could. But tell me what you do every day and I'll tell you where you'll be in a year. That's something that I repeatedly say to clients on podcasts, on social media. And with the narrative and the story, it was breaking down this limiting belief that it's what you do every day in terms of the habits, hence the 7 habits in terms of rewriting your story. That's the subtitle. But it was getting people to question what they've told themselves, that you're actually holding yourself back because of what your parents told you, or what a teacher told you, or what society told you, or what your friends told you, or what you learned along the way. And you're not backing yourself. You're not following the life that's supposed to be led for you. And you're not jumping out of bed every morning. That's feedback that you're directionally incorrect with what you're doing. You should be excited to jump out of bed every morning. If you don't have the energy to do it, it means that you need to look at your nutrition and your fitness and your mobility, all the stuff that you talk about on the podcast and online. And if it's because you hate your job, in my case, it means that it's probably not what you should be doing. And you don't have to quit tomorrow. You might have 4 kids and a mortgage and you're not able to do that. But maybe you can in 6 months or a year or 2 years. You can start something that makes you jump out of bed every morning and gives you that passion for life. That's what I wanted to unpack in rewriting your story and getting to the root cause that you're not living the life you want and you're not happy and fulfilled because you're not doing the right habits every day. But there's an element of it not being your fault because you were thought to believe this way, you were conditioned to think this way. But now that you know, now it's up to you. You're not responsible for what happened, but you are responsible for the changes that you make going forward. That was the message I was trying to get through in the new book.
Man, I love that. We've touched on several of the habits already. The one that really stood out to me that I wanted to learn a little bit more about is choosing the people in your life, and I believe you call it friend, foe, and emotional vampire. I think this is kind of subtle, and sometimes we allow people in our lives without realizing that they're deterring us from being what we could be. And so, when you write about that, especially the emotional vampire part, what were you trying to convey there?
Something that I grossly underestimated a decade ago was how important it is to be around the right people. And my default thinking was always addition versus subtraction in most areas of life. I think it's a bit of a type A default setting. Add more, do more, add more, do more. And there's a famous line, I think it's from Lao Tzu, that happiness comes from subtraction, not addition. And it got me looking at the people I was spending time with. And my mom, and Jesus, I wish I listened 2 decades ago because this was genius advice, similar to what would you do for free. But she used to always tell me, if you lie down with dogs, you'll get fleas. She would always tell me that. That line was always to me and my sister. She would regularly say, and it was now I realize it was feedback when I was hanging around people who I shouldn't be hanging around with. She wouldn't tell me not to hang around with them. She wouldn't tell me you shouldn't be around that person, but she would just go, Brian, remember when you lie down with dogs, you get fleas. And what I now understand that to mean is that if you're around people who are emotional vampires, sucking your energy, taking your energy, it doesn't matter if you're the most positive person in the world. It's impossible to not let that affect you or impact you in some way. And something I regularly do is a friend audit and a circle audit of the people in your life. Like, who are you spending the most time? There's a famous Jim Rohn quote that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And that's probably one of the truest quotes there is out there. If you hang around with 5 fit people, you'll probably become the sixth. You hang around with 5 obese people, you'll probably become the sixth. You hang around with 5 rich people, you'll probably become the sixth. 5 poor people, the sixth. It goes on because whether we know it or not, we're being conditioned by the people that are around us, by the things that we're consuming. And the beauty of that is you can choose for the most part. You can't choose your family, but you can choose the mental weight you give the words. That's a tool I give in rewriting your story, that if you've got a mom, a dad, a brother, a sister, someone who's an emotional vampire, and you can't physically cut them, you can do mental gymnastics, is what I call it. You can do things that minimize the amount of weight that you give the words for those people so that they're not fueling that unsupportive narrative or story that was put there years ago that you now need to unlearn. You need to remove that story and let it go because it doesn't serve you anymore. And that was such an important thing because when I started to adopt, it was actually one of my ex-girlfriends who gave me this line, and we're still friends to this day. She's a wonderful, wonderful human being. She lives in London now, and we still keep in contact, but I haven't seen her in years. And she gave me the line that when you stop chasing the right things, when you stop chasing the wrong things, you give the right things an opportunity to catch up. And I never forgot that. Like, it was actually in the context of us when we broke up. I'll never forget the conversation because she was amazing. We were best friends, but we both knew we weren't going to spend our lives together. And we had that conversation, and she was like, look, I suppose when we stop chasing this wrong thing, it'll give us both the chance for the right thing to catch up. And friends are a bit like that. And the people you spend time with, when you remove the people who are sucking your energy day to day, you'll end up finding higher frequency people, people who are vibrating at a similar level to you, people who want to succeed, who want to get in shape, who want to look after their health, who want to have a great relationship, who want to live life on their terms. You'll start attracting those people because you've made that decision. And that's what I was trying to get across in that habit, that it doesn't have to be just something that happens automatically. We think that our friends, our family members, and to some degree that's true with family members, they're there and we don't have control over this. But if you lie down with dogs, you get fleas. You can't be around negative people and expect to be a positive person. The other line I gave is don't plant apple seeds and expect oranges to grow. Don't be around negative people and expect to have a positive life. That was the take home message from that habit.
Yeah. And I love that. Another habit that you write about is something that I struggle with all the time. I believe it's the last habit where you say live without regrets. And it makes sense and it is a bit cliche, but like, we're sitting here on a Tuesday having an awesome conversation and we've got our day-to-day kind of stuff and the minutia we have to do and running the business and you have to do accounting and you have to do all this stuff that's not so fun. How do we keep that in mind in a practical way when we're day-to-day just trying to live our lives and do all the tasks we need to do to make sure we're also living without regret?
I opened that chapter with this is the biggest cliche of the whole book, and let me unpack it. I'm paraphrasing slightly because it's one of those things that if I saw from a 25-year-old Bally influencer, I'd be like, ah, Brian, no, just scroll past. But at this stage of life, and I tried to put some practical tools in there about living without regret. And one of my favorite books, I think it's not Bonnie Tyler. She wrote like Total Eclipse of the Heart. It's a song, but it's Bonnie something about the top 5 regrets of the dying. And one of them in there was, I wish I had the courage to live life on my terms. And that one always sticks with me because when you start to understand you get one life, which is another massive cliche, but you start to put some practical tools around it. One of my favorites is your stoic visualization, your negative visualization. It's a stoic philosophy of picturing all the things. This is actually a really useful one if you're in that I'm not enough, I don't have enough. This is similar to you, Casey. I default to that. I had to do a lot of rewiring of my mindset over the years so that I didn't default to lack and scarcity versus the abundance and great things I have in my life. I used a line from W.C. Clement earlier about don't forget the flowers at your feet when you're reaching for the moon, meaning that don't forget the amazing things you have. Although it's good to reach out for these incredible things, don't forget all the beautiful things that life has given you up until this point. And living without regret is similar. And that stoic negative visualization is where you picture the things that if they were taken from you tomorrow, you would be heartbroken, you would be devastated. Bethany, your dogs, the career you have. For me, it's my daughter, my partner, my family, my friends, my job. I love my work. I jump out of bed every morning getting to do what I do. They're things that if they got taken away from me, I would be devastated. And sometimes when you're living in this more and more and more, and that desire zone of desire being the contract you keep it yourself to be unhappy until you get the thing that you want, when you're living in that default mode, you're in this lack. And doing that negative visualization where you picture the thing you love the most being taken away instantly grounds you in gratitude. And when I was researching this book, something that I didn't know before I started researching the book was, and I went heavy, and I don't go heavy into the neuroscience in the book, but I needed to go into heavy into the neuroscience for the understanding so that I could simplify it down for the message to tell it in stories, was that your brain can't hold gratitude and anxiety at the same time. It's impossible. Your brain can't feel anxious and gratitude at the same time. And that's why your methodologies or modalities of negative visualization can work so well, because it instantly puts you into a gratitude based state and it reduces the anxiety. And when you're trying to live a life without regret, you can just focus on, and I do what I call my 97-year-old deathbed. What would you regret more on your 97-year-old deathbed? And then live life in accordance with that. It makes it so much easier because we overcomplicate things. We get caught in the minutiae, the day to day. When ultimately, picture yourself and meditate on your deathbed. It's 97 years of age. If you're lucky to get to that point, what would you regret not doing? When I signed up to Marathon des Sables, the 6 back-to-back marathons in the Sahara, my 97-year-old self would have regretted not doing it because I was afraid. And one of the other habits in the book is managing the fear and doing it anyways. And I would have regretted not doing that because of fear. The Arctic was the same. When my Achilles tore, I remember sitting in this teepee with a reindeer tribe, people who had a bit of English and were speaking some Swedish language of their local indigenous tribe. And I sat there going, I need to keep going. I was like, if I go home, there's going to be a point when my Achilles isn't torn, when my eyelids aren't frozen over, and I'm going to regret not having to go with this. And I made the decision to myself, if I get pulled and if my Achilles ruptures and I can't move, yeah, 100%. I don't want to end my life. I love my life. But if I can move, I'm going to keep fucking moving. And this pain is temporary and it will pass eventually. And that was a 97-year-old decision I made. I had no problem being pulled 50 kilometers from the end because my Achilles ruptured. I could live with that. But what I couldn't live with was coming home and telling my daughter in 10 years' time that I pulled out of a race because my Achilles tore and it was really painful, but I could have moved. I would have had to hobble to a hospital. Like, I would have had to move to a hospital. I'm like, fuck it. If I'm going to hobble to a hospital, I may as well try and hobble to the finish line. Like, so that was my thinking at the time. And right, wrong, indifferent, everyone is, can have their own viewpoints on that. But that was my truth at the time. And my 97-year-old rule came into effect there, where I thought I would regret not giving this my all. I would regret not seeing, can I get to this finish line? Can I pull my leg behind me? And that's a really out there example. But career, relationships, people who live in a story of, it's fine, I'll do my 9 to 5. I hate my job. I hate my boss, but it's fine. It's okay. Is that really what you'd regret at your 97-year-old deathbed? Do you want to do the next 40 years or 30 years or 20 years in a job you hate when maybe there's something else out there that's more for you and that's aligned for you? Same in a relationship. And the sunk cost fallacy is a very real thing. I've been in bad relationships. I've been in jobs I've hated, and you put so much time and energy and money into it. The sunk cost fallacy, theoretically throwing bad money after good because you've spent money on it. You have to keep throwing more money after it in the financial sense. But the same thing works with time. And time is an infinite resource. It's the thing we're not getting back. And with the 97-year-old rule and living without regret, filtering things through, what would my 97-year-old self regret more? And then living in alignment with that, and then arming yourself with the tools, which is what I try and do with the 7 habits. The 7 habits are there as a guideline and a framework and a blueprint that if you follow these 7 habits, it's going to help you live a life without regret. That living a life without regret is your anchor point. And then the other 6 habits are the thing that allow you to do that.
Got it. That's a lovely answer. I absolutely love that. And of course, it's rooted in Stoicism, which is such an amazing practice to study. And yeah, that negative visualization at first seems terrible, but it does give you that appreciation, like looking around, even just in this room and the room you're in, like everything in these rooms will be gone. At some point, they will all be gone. And to hold on to that, it puts you in that space of gratitude and appreciation, which I really love. When I'm researching a guest, I feel like I'm kind of like you. You seem to do a lot of research on your guests before you have them on the show. I not a mistake, but I normally would listen to you being hosted on other people's shows, but I started researching you by listening to your own podcast, and I enjoy your podcast so much. I never actually went back and listened to you being hosted on a show because I just love the content. I listened to several episodes, including a recent one you did with a guest that you and I both shared, Dr. Jenny Powers, which was really, really good. A tough question to answer, but what has podcasting taught you? And are there any moments that really stand out? Maybe some of your favorite moments, or maybe even just something that's happened recently.
Yeah, another great one. And we're 535 episodes in, or something along those lines,
Love
700
it.
total, but 500 and something of the main show. So a lot of great guests. A couple of things. The one that jumps out the most was the only podcast in memory that I was really nervous before. And that was when I had Robin Sharma on the podcast. So Robin has written The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, amongst other several books, but that was the first ever personal development book that I read. And I had Robin on this pedestal. And one of the things that has unfortunately been true throughout my last 10 or 12 years as someone in the kind of public space is the line that you shouldn't meet your heroes. And in a lot of cases, that has been true. I've met people that I followed, and some were rude, some were maybe having a bad day. There's lots of stuff going on in people's lives, but the experience wasn't very pleasant. So I was really nervous before the episode with Robin. And not only was he one of the most incredible people I've ever spoken to, he gave me a compliment and a line that I still carry and literally looked at right before we came on air here. The first was the compliment of the show because Robin has done thousands of podcasts. And he said this was one of my most enjoyable conversations. He was like, "You really did your research." And he goes, "I really appreciate that." And it was coming from such a loving place. So, first, it made me think, okay, there's a reason why I'm doing this. And there's a reason why the podcast is successful because I'm showing up from coming from a place of love, peace, service, etc. But the thing that landed was a line. And I looked at right before we went on air, and that's be world class. His philosophy when he shows up for things is just be world class in what you're doing. And although I don't hit it on every podcast, every interview, every client call, every time I create something, every time I write, it's always the goal. It's always the anchor point before we came on air. You did like a breathing technique, Casey, right before we recorded. I'm not sure if everyone else could see that, where you just kind of took a breath and sat into it. Right before we came on, I did something similar, but the mantra in my head was be world class. And I got that from Robin on that podcast. And it's something that I still carry with me to this day.
Wow, that's an amazing lesson. I love that. And yeah, you don't always hit it. I think both of us have done interviews where we wish we would have gone a little deeper, asked different questions, but having that as a goal, I think is fantastic. And just striving for that all the time and keeping that in mind is fantastic. Man, so you've written 5 books, you've got the coaching program. How do you see your evolution into the future?
It's interesting because if you asked me that 5 or 6 years ago, I think we probably mirror an echo from a similar hymn sheet here. I had the more mindset. So my answer was always more. Like we're developing an app right now. We're building out a different mentorship based coaching program for entrepreneurs. We do a lot of quote unquote more. But that would have been losing the forest from the trees or me confusing the map with the terrain, which is something that I've done on occasion where I'm so focused on the end goal, I lose sight of everything around me. And the answer would be with more books, more programs, more courses. The honest answer, Casey, is as long as I'm still jumping out of bed every morning, which again sounds like such a cliche based on what we've talked about, but it's the God honest truth right now. I know I'm directionally correct. And I filter everything that I do in my life, business, personal, romantic, and otherwise, is will this thing or person nourish me or deplete me? And as long as I'm consistently able to answer this thing I'm doing is nourishing me, and there's always going to be parts of your day that will deplete you. You mentioned the accounting earlier, the fine tuning of programs, all these things that are quite depleting. There's an element of that. But as long as 80% in that 80-20 Pareto principle tends to apply well here, 80% of your life is with nourishing people, with people who give you energy, with things that you love to do. And the other 20% is the minutia, the stuff that you have to do because it's the price you pay for the cost of entry with the business, with the podcast, with the relationship, with the fitness goal, etc. As long as that doesn't skew out of balance, I'm happy to keep doing what I'm doing and living a life without regret to tie it all together and creating a business I don't want to retire from with people that I love and would do anything for. And probably the same, I would imagine in reverse, they would say they would do anything for me. I know that that's what I want to keep cultivating as opposed to more and more and more. The answer now, which is a crap answer, I know, to wrap up a podcast, is more of the same, just making sure that it's being optimized versus constantly seeking more and coming from that place of scarcity so that I may be able to live in a place of abundance, live in a place of love, be in a place of peace, and just keep that as my focus point and my North Star. There was once upon a time when my North Star was more achievement, status, growth, achievement, status, growth. And now it's peace, love, service. And that's my North Star. And I come back to that regularly. And if my answer changes and I start to veer towards an old version of myself, an old story because of, a lack of confidence in myself, wanting to prove other people wrong, not letting go of baggage that was put there by other people, words and affirmations that were put there by other people, I know that I need to focus back on the true North Star, which is the love, the peace, the service. And again, that's constantly something I check in with nearly every day, but it's the honest answer.
I can't think of a better way to end the podcast, man. That's a great answer. I really love and appreciate that. And I have to say, man, you are world class. I so appreciate your energy, the very inspirational stories. But beyond that, there's a lot of really good practical tips. I've certainly learned a lot, and I've really appreciated hosting you. So you are world class, Brian. I really appreciate you. Tell the people where they can go to find you and connect with you and your work.
Thank you so much, Casey. One, this was such an enjoyable interview, and two, it's right back at you. Like your preparation for this, similar to when Robin said it to me. I know it's not the exact same, but to get the feedback from a guest about how appreciative it is for someone to have done their research, to have looked into it, to be present in the conversation, it's a testament to your interview skills. So the podcast is just going to go onwards and upwards from here. So, firstly, thank you so much from my side. For those who want to check out my stuff, the Brian Keane podcast, I'm Brian Keane Fitness on all the social media channels, and then the books are available everywhere. Amazon's probably the easiest place to get them. But again, I always tell people, look, check out whatever's going to connect with you. If you like podcasts, check out the podcast. If you like social, you like short form clips, check out the social. And if you like to read, check out the books.
Perfect. We will link to all of that. We'll link to your website as well, which is very well done, by the way. You did a really good job on the website. It's very clean and easy to find the information. So we'll link to all of that. Brian, I hope this isn't our last conversation. We'd love to host you again anytime to chat about your life and all the things you are learning and providing such a good value for the people you work with. But for now, thank you so very much for everything you do. And thank you for taking time out of your very busy life to be on our show today. We really appreciate you.
An absolute pleasure. I look forward to round two, Casey. Thank you so much again.
Absolutely. Thank you a lot. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.